Trauma, shock. I would know my different types of shock. Hemorrhagic shock, okay? Stuff like that. You know, the different types of shock we talked about. Spinal shock, hemorrhagic shock, hypovolemic shocks, those types of shock. When a person suffers from burns, what type of shock do they usually go into?
Hypovolemic.
Hypovolemic shock, because what are they losing?
Plasma.
Blood plasma. All right? Signs and symptoms and the proper treatment. Soft tissue injuries and burns, especially burns. I would know severity of burns, my different degrees of burns. Head injuries, rising intracranial pressure. The signs and symptoms for rising intracranial pressure are opposite of the signs of what? Who said? Shock. So in a shock patient, how does a shock patient present? What's their pulse? What's a shock patient?
Tachycardic.
Tachycardic. Rapid and weak pulse, right?
Low BP.
And where's their blood pressure?
Low.
Late arriving sign for shock. Blood pressure is where? Low. How does somebody who has rising intracranial pressure look? They have high blood pressure and their pulse is dropped. All right? So the signs and symptoms are opposite. Okay? Remember, with almost every trauma, we talked about open versus closed. If the bone is protruding through the skin, is that an open or closed injury?
Open.
What about an open chest injury? What if we say it was an open chest injury? You have what? Access where?
To the lungs.
Into the inner cavity of the chest. What about an open head injury?
The noggin.
Brain matter is showing, right? So understand the difference between open and closed, okay? No chest and abdominal trauma. Types of injuries and treatment. What does evisceration mean? Your intestines are hanging out. And how do we treat that? Cover it with a moist, and then what do you put over that?
Warm, moist.
And occlusive. And how many sides do you tape that on? 4 sides. Spinal injuries, immobilization, musculoskeletal injuries. If the person has a fracture of the radius ulna and the arm is bent at an angle and there's no pulse, what can you do? One shot to
Manual traction.
pull gentle traction and put it back in alignment, right? All right. Environmental emergencies, no heat and cold, no all three of your heat cramps, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke, and know you're cold. No frostbite versus hypothermia, okay? Childbirth, different, what happens to the female patient during pregnancy, the different stages of childbirth, the complications of pregnancy and childbirth, neonate emergency care, all right? How do we ventilate the child? When do we start CPR on the neonate? Okay? The different things we talked about with the pediatric patient, especially how do we treat the pediatric patient, and specific pediatric medical emergencies such as croup and epiglottitis, and then geriatrics, specific type of injury patterns we would see with the elderly people, and how do we necessarily deal with them with their different underlying medical conditions, okay? Pretty much not that much with geriatrics. I would lean a little more heavily on pediatrics, okay? Ambulance operations. Where do ambulances have most of their accidents? Intersections. Okay? Good. What's the second most common places that, what's an ambulance doing? The second most common time it gets in an accident? Usually
On scene.
going backwards. Backing up. Usually you hit shit when you're backing up. Okay? All right? MCIs, we talked about it last night, the different colors for triage tags. All right? What's a red tag patient? Immediate. What's a black tag patient?
Dead, Murray, dead.
Dead. What's a green tag patient? What's the medical terminology for it? Delayed transport or walking wounded. And what's a yellow A yellow tech patient.
A little worse.
WMDs, we talked about them today. Signs and symptoms of nerve gas, what did I say it was? What was the acronym? Bludgeon. Okay? Terrorist attacks, MCI, we're going to institute a incident command structure. Secondary devices mean that the device has been planted and basically it's aimed for the rescuers. All right? It's usually placed in a place where the rescuers are near it and they want to get the rescuers. And then involving a possible crime scene. Should you touch everything in the apartment if it's a possible crime scene? Incident command, the different branches. I talked about the functions of each branch and then the command staff. The liaison and the PIO and the safety officer are all part of the command staff. And who do they work for? Who is that person? The incident commander. All right? Where do you park your ambulance?
Up.
And what did I tell you about time, distance, and shielding?
Time, distance, and shielding.
That's it. Think about my ex-girlfriend, right? Did any of this come as a shock to anybody?
No.
No. Good. All right, give me a couple more minutes of your time, and I'm going to go over some